Now, Prime Minister John Key has been defending remarks made by Finance Minister Bill English this week, who has suggested New Zealand businesses could use the 30% wage gap with Australia to its advantage. Labour leader Phil Goff says these remarks show the country is going backwards and not forwards. Joining me now is live from Parliament is Prime Minister John Key. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morning, Rachel.
Bill English has opened up a bit of a can of worms here, hasn't he? It may give us a competitive edge, but there's no advantage, I would have thought, to those on low wages.
Well, Bill English isn't advocating low wages. He's simply saying that there is a wage differential. In fact, I'd argue very strongly with you on an after-tax basis we're closing that wage gap with Australia. But, you know, as we've discussed, I think, on this show before, Australia is a very fast-growing economy. It's the fastest-growing economy in the OECD. And he's simply saying, look, New Zealanders are well-educated. There is a gap at the moment, and so you're bound to see some inbound investment to take advantage of that gap. And that's no different from when your exchange rate is highly competitive. You often see inbound investment to take advantage of that. So he's not saying it's a utopia because we have a wage gap or that he wants to see that remain. He's just simply saying it's a statement of fact that it's there.
OK, so if it is a short-term measure, what are the triggers then to ultimately lift those low wages?
Yeah, I mean, that's the critical point, isn't it? I mean, so the number of things. Firstly, having a tax cut regime like the government's had is important because in Australia, top personal rate's now at 45%. In New Zealand, it's 33%. That makes a big difference, for instance, when you're competing for doctors and nurses and the likes, because they're in those higher brackets, particularly doctors more than nurses. So that's an example of where you can narrow the gap because of tax policy. Over time, you've got to lift productivity. That's why the government set up the Productivity Commission. It's why we're investing in infrastructure. It's why we've got a skills program. It's why we're trying to make sure that government isn't too large and overpowering in the economy. And you certainly need capital investment. That is one of the things the Australians have had a lot of. And I think it's interesting, if you look at the Australian economy, there was quite an interesting article in the AFR, the Australian Financial Review, last Friday. And it was saying, really, if you strip out the mining industry out of Australia, then they face quite a number of substantial issues in their economy. Overpriced housing market, very weak retail consumption. I mean, it's not as quite a rosy as picture as sometimes people present on this side of the Tasman. OK, let's talk now about the oil exploration off the coast of the Cape. Greenpeace strongly opposing that, and we've seen that from those protests. You've said, though, you may bring in the Navy to help calm that situation. That could be seen as quite an aggressive move on the part of the government. Well, I haven't said we'd bring in the Navy. What I've said is that we have issued to Petrobras a 5-year licence which allows them to undertake seismic work and potentially drill one exploration well in the Rocamara Basin. Now, that's an area where we could create a lot of jobs, where if you want to narrow that gap, that's an example of highly paid jobs and export revenue to the country. So my view is that they've got the legal right to do that, and it's the police's responsibility to uphold their legal right to do that. Equally, Greenpeace have a right to protest, but they have to do so in a lawful and peaceful way. And the police have a memorandum of understanding with the Navy, so it's the police that run the operation. They have independence, but my understanding is they can use Navy assets under that memorandum of understanding.
OK, now you're off to Europe later this month for the royal wedding. Do you know what you're going to wear yet?
I do, actually. I haven't seen it. I wouldn't get too excited, but it is on order and it's coming. I think what Brona's wearing will be a little bit more special than what I'm wearing, actually, Rachel. But anyway, there we go. OK, you're also meeting with the British Prime Minister David Cameron. You'll have an audience with the Queen. You'll meet Prince Charles too, and the French President. I would think that of all of those people, probably Nicolas Sarkozy sounds the most interesting. Yeah, well, I think they're all interesting. I mean, I've met Nicolas Sarkozy before. He's a very flamboyant character in true French style. But yeah, look, I'm looking forward to the whole trip, and going out to have lunch and an audience with the Queen will be great. We're going to Windsor Castle. You might remember on the first trip that got cancelled, we were going to Balmoral. And the second trip we were going to Buckingham Palace. So we're certainly working our way through the Queen's residences, but yeah, looking forward to seeing her again. She's a wonderful woman, and I think she does a great job as Monarch of New Zealand. So we'll see her, and obviously dinner with David Cameron will be a highlight as well. Just
touching again on the French, did they ask to meet with us, or did we approach them? And what's going to be on the agenda?
Bit of both, I think. Well, the French are taking over leadership of the G20 this year, so that rotates. So we'll talk to them about economic issues in Europe. There are a number of other areas, obviously, global terrorism. It'll be interesting to get an update on what's happening in Libya and how they see the Middle East playing out. Obviously, the French have been the forefront of that no-fly zone in Libya. So it's just a good opportunity to discuss those issues. Climate change is something that Nicolas Sarkozy is very passionate about, so it'll be interesting to see where he thinks all of that debate is going and what might happen at the end of the year when we go into those climate change conferences that we have on an annual basis.
Okay, I do have to tell you just one little story. When you were last in the UK, I was at Downing Street when you met with Gordon Brown, and as I don't know if you remember, when you drove into Downing Street, there was you got out of the car and there was a bunch of photographers, about 30, who just went ballistic snapping, and I think it gave you a bit of a fright, and you looked around and you said, how's it going? And all the snappers just stopped immediately. And you went inside Downing Street and they said to me, is that what every New Zealand is like? And I was like, yeah, pretty much. So if you're going to see David Cameron at Downing Street, you're going to have to come up with another quip. They'll be expecting one from you.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll go over and maybe we'll take them a sausage roll or something.
That might work.
Feed them out front. Yeah, okay.
All right. Prime Minister John Key, thanks for your time this morning.
See you later. Bye-bye.